Hello and welcome to the show. Coming to you today from Madrid, we speak with Turkish Foreign Minister Ali Babacan. Madrid has been playing host to the first Alliance of Civilizations Forum, with its founding partner Turkey attending. Turkey positions itself as a bridge between Europe, Asia and the Middle East and hopes to consolidate that role with accession to the European Union. However, it has to overcome a number of obstacles first, including addressing issues of human rights and international practices and standards. Turkey's government says it has made significant progress on all fronts and has a long-term plan to ensure it achieves full membership. What exactly does that plan entail? Well, today we find out from our guest, Turkey's Foreign Minister Ali Babacan. He recently took the post after serving as Minister of Economy for the country and still serves as the chief EU negotiator for Turkey's accession talks. Minister, it's good to talk with you.
Thank you.
So I have to start by asking you, Turkey and Spain joined hands for the UN Alliance of Civilizations, a chance to address the misunderstandings and the issues of conflict between mostly the West and the Muslim world. What have you seen coming out of this event, the Alliance of Civilizations?
This initiative is something which has been started jointly with the Spanish and Turkish government, but then it has been continuing under the UN umbrella. And it is getting more and more attention from all around the world. And this is quite evidenced by the fact that more than 20 ministers and more than 7 or 8 heads of states and governments were today here in Madrid. And this is something which shows that there is a keen interest globally. Not only politicians, but during the forum, we were able to see also many religious leaders, academicians, opinion leaders who had a keen interest. So there was obviously a big need for such an initiative. And we were very happy about also the enthusiasm. It's not just numbers attending, but also it is the quality of interest and how people were so keen on joining the discussions and coming up with concrete ideas about what can be done. And countries started to develop their national plans about what they will do on their own to help this process. Turkish government, Spanish government, we have already prepared our plans, and we also called all the friends of this group, which is more than 70 countries right now, to prepare their own national plans about what they are willing to do to help the initiative. And there are many projects, many concrete steps under consideration. These are about youth, about education, about regional meetings, about media, about universities, how to involve NGOs, and many, many ideas are coming up. And I think this initiative is a big answer to what happened on 9/11 and all the discussions that happened after 9/11 about the clash of civilizations and so forth.
Let me ask you, with regards to Turkey's position as a country, a Muslim country, predominantly Muslim country, that can show, if you like, what people consider the moderate voice of Islam. How does this alliance position Turkey as a good example for other countries then?
Well, actually, we tend not to classify or give an adjective to Islam, saying it moderate or so. Islam is Islam. But what we are doing as Turkey is, in Turkey we have a high majority of Muslim people, as you know. But on the other hand, Turkey is a country which is going through an enormous transformation process. So we have a reform program which involves deepening our democracy, improving our practice of fundamental rights and freedoms and rule of law. And we do have also an EU accession process, which is a good framework for a lot of our reform efforts. In a way, in Turkey, we are proving more and more that Islam, democracy, and secularism can coexist and function properly. And what's happening in Turkey is not just staying within the boundaries of our country, but it is sending the right kind of signals to a very wide area. Because in a way, in many countries in the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia, even beyond the region, in which there are a lot of young intellectuals, reform-minded people who would very much like to do things in their own countries, but they need a working example in front of them so that they are more empowered to do what they want. And in a way, Turkey is becoming more and more of a good test case that Islam and modernism does not really conflict. It is really doable to have both in one country. And when we talk about modernism and Islam, it is also about religious freedoms. It is also about letting people practice their religion or their religious sect in whichever way they want. So on one hand, we are talking about religious freedoms, but on the other hand, we are talking about a truly democratic system in which people can enjoy their fundamental rights and freedoms.
Your Prime Minister, Erdogan, has said that Turkey's accession to the EU, to the European Union, could actually help promote peace. Does he mean by this description you're giving as an example, or is there something more deep?
The accession process of Turkey started on 17th of December 2004. And that decision was taken in Brussels by all the EU member states. On that specific day, there were more than 270 journalists traveling to Brussels from different Islamic countries to follow up what's going on. And the next day, all around the region and even very in faraway countries, this was #1 news. Because the fact that Turkey, a country which has a majority of Muslim population, is now getting into a process where the country is going to share more and more of the values and ideals of the European Union. And these values, as I said, is about rule of law and democracy and so forth. So that's why this very interesting process that we are continuing is not just about adding one more member to the European Union. Turkish accession process is not just about having a 28th, 29th country in the European Union. It is a very important peace project in itself. We have always seen the EU as the most important peace project of the 20th century, because especially after the Second World War, especially after a big war during which millions died, the countries which were in big conflict could come together and they started this union. So it's a big peace project. And for the 21st century, Turkish accession process can easily be viewed as one of the most important peace projects, because this is now not something specific to Europe, but this is about civilizations. This is about the civilizations don't need to be in conflict, but they can live in harmony.
Minister, I have to ask you, a European Commission poll said that public support for joining the EU may be waning. For example, in spring 2007, 62% of Turks believed that they would benefit from EU membership, but by fall, the autumn, that support dropped 9 points to 53%. So do you feel that people are getting weary of the process? Do you think people maybe don't see the benefit of EU membership that much anymore?
It actually highly depends on how we ask the question to Turkish people. When we ask the question in the polls, like, do you think it is something good for Turkey to become a member of the EU? More than 50% of Turkish people would say yes. And depending on the time, this could be like between 55 to 75%. There's a fluctuation also. But on the other hand, when we ask the question to our people, do you believe Turkey will join the EU one day? Or do you believe the EU will accept Turkey as a member? Then we get a less percentage of yes to that question. Because on one hand, Turkish people believe that it is something good for the country, but on the other hand, they have serious doubts about whether it's going to happen or not. And these doubts are mostly generated from the attitude coming from some political leaders in some EU member states. We first had the situation in Germany, the German election process, and then we had the situation in France, then we had the Cyprus issue, and all this political noise, I should say, has created a feeling of being not wanted across our population. So our population is quite well educated to understand the benefits of the process and the target, but they have serious doubts whether the membership is actually going to happen or not. I think that's a very rational approach.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you, there was a quote from the French President, Nicolas Sarkozy, who says Turkey has no place in Europe. And when you have someone like that, who's obviously riding high in some ways, how you overcome that kind of negativity?
The accession process of Turkey started with a unanimous vote. And France was one of the countries which accepted. So what we are expecting from all the member states is just fulfilling the promises and not reversing the commitments which have been already made. Because pacta sunt servanda is one of the main principles of the European Union. But on the other hand, we do understand that every country has its domestic politics. Every country has different mood in terms of the domestic political situation. But on the other hand, sometimes the words mentioned to be consumed for domestic politics do not stay within the boundaries of that country. But even primary school kids in Turkey, 8 years old kids, they can go to the internet and see what people are telling. So this kind of approach, in our view, does not help.
We had so many emails that came in when we told our viewers we would be speaking with you. So I want to put a couple of those to you, please, Minister. This one came from Bruno Druski in Paris, in France, and he says, why is Turkey more interested in joining the EU, which is in moral and economic crisis, than with fellow Muslim countries, which are also in crisis? Turkey shares religious, social and economic values with Muslim nations, which could serve as an alternative to globalized capitalism.
Well, we first of all have a very strong perspective about a well-functioning democratic system. And when we talk about democracy, there are different qualities of democracy that we can see in different countries. Turkey wants to be a first-class democracy, not a second or third-class democracy, but a first-class democracy. And despite the difficulties or the problems in implementation, we believe that EU standards, the Copenhagen criteria, is a good benchmark for us to meet, to reach to. Regardless of those criteria being whether properly implemented by some EU member states or not, we take those as the benchmarks to compare us with and reach. So also the practices in other areas like rule of law or fundamental rights, EU, in theory at least, is one of the best globally. So that's why we have taken those as benchmarks and we are moving towards those criteria.
We had an email that came in from a gentleman who's Moroccan but lives in Helsinki, and he says, his name is Brahim, from Helsinki in Finland. He says, Turkey is strong with or without Europe, and Muslims all over the world look to it for support. Sarkozy and other Europeans are scared of Islam, not Turkey. Do you think that's the case?
Well, actually, that falls very nicely in what we have been discussing here in Madrid for the last 2 days. Once people don't know about much, if it's religion or any society or any country that they don't know much, I should say, they tend to either dislike it or they are afraid from it. So here communications plays a key role. There's a big perception gap, I should say. There is a big gap between realities and the perception about Islam and also about Turkey as well. So when you ask questions about Islam or Turkey to people who have never been to Turkey, for example, versus people who have stayed there at least for 2-3 days, you would get enormously different answers to those questions. And unfortunately, especially after 9/11 and especially after the continuous broadcasting of terror and Islam, and using Islam and terror together, unfortunately, created a very adverse image or perception about Islam, which we totally disagree. Islam is about peace. And violence cannot be tolerated for whatever reason it has been made or it is being made. So we strongly condemn violence or any terrorism, any kind of terrorism. Unfortunately, sometimes this is presented as if terrorism made in the name of Islam, or some organizations, terrorist organizations, declared that they are doing this for the name of Islam, which cannot be accepted, which has nothing to do with the realities. So in a way, our modernization process, our transformation process as Turkey is a very important answer to this. So we are, in a way, proving more and more that a country where Islam is practiced by a very large population is going through this enormous reform process. So this is doable.
Now, we had another email, and I put this to you. Obviously, these issues always come up when talking about Turkey, but Peter in Toronto, in Canada, says, before Turkey joins the EU, which values human rights, Turkey must withdraw its troops from Cyprus and address the Armenian and Kurdish issues. Is there going to be unfinished business, or are there issues that you will have to deal with, irrespective of EU?
Well, our foreign policy has a main principle, and it is zero problem with the neighbors. That's our strategy, that's our target. Zero problems with our neighbors. Both for Cyprus issue and for the Armenian issue, we have been the ones trying to resolve it And we have been the ones being always one step ahead, always open to communication, and doing everything that we can to find solutions to the problems. For Cyprus, for example, in 2004, we were very close to a comprehensive solution. The Turkish side accepted the UN plan. They voted yes, but the Greek Cypriot side rejected the plan. So I think that was very important to show that how willing we are to reach a solution. We don't want conflicts. We want solutions. But in any kind of conflict, in any kind of problem, if one of the sides are benefiting from the continuation of the problem, then it's very difficult to resolve. And that's what we are facing with the Cyprus issue. We don't believe that the Greek Cypriots did enough to prove that they are pro-solution. It seems that they are quite happy with the statu quo. It seems that they are enjoying the EU membership, all the funds coming from the EU being used for the Greek Cypriot side. They occupy all the seats in the European Parliament, even for the Turkish Cypriot seats are now occupied by the Greek Cypriot seats, and they tend to, or they seem to quite enjoy the statu quo. And in any kind of solution, there will be political equality, and they will have to share what they have with the Turkish Cypriots, and probably they don't want it. But the international community should not allow this to continue. The international community should say, stop, this is not sustainable. You have to find a solution. You cannot just sit there and continue the problem. And we will do, as Turkey, everything that we can, and the Turkish Cypriots are ready to do everything that they can to reach a comprehensive solution. And the situation is not very different for the Armenian case. We have been taking so many confidence-building steps, so many unilateral steps to start to improve things, but so far it didn't work. But we will keep trying, and we will be ready for dialogue, communication, because we think that dialogue, communication is the best way to solve problems. If we don't talk, we cannot solve the problems.
Well, Minister, always so many questions, never enough time. I thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for joining us as we brought you our coverage from Madrid all this week. Be sure to join us next week as we come to you from London. And don't forget, you can always send us any suggestions for show topics by sending an email to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk is coming up.